What's up, everybody? Hey to everybody that was in the chat hanging out. Thanks for joining and taking the time to learn a little bit about abstract and sketch libraries and how they work together. How we add value to sketch libraries, if you're already using them, why you should be using them. Before I jump in, if you have any questions, the Q&A section is the best place for that. That's going to allow me to follow up with questions, mark them as answered, or actually type out a reply to anybody that is helping me on the side, answering questions as we go throughout this. So it's 9:05 in San Francisco here. Let's go ahead and jump in really quick. For those of you that have never joined a one-on-one session or worked with me by proxy of abstract or doing any sort of onboarding or education and stuff, my name is Alden. I'm abstract design advocate. This means that I focus on a lot of education and onboarding for enterprise teams, pretty much act as product expert and get to meet a lot of really cool design teams that are doing things with abstract. So it's good to meet you all. If you ever need to get a hold of me, my contact info is on this. Based in San Francisco in the basement of Abstract's headquarters right now, where we have like a little webinar and video room set up for me. So if you're ever in SF, come have a coffee, hang out. We've got some people here and we're mostly a remote team, but we do have a footprint here in San Francisco. So before we also jump in, questions, like I mentioned, Q&A section, feel free to just try it out, see if it works, but it should be located right down there next to the raise hand option. We're not going to be doing any raising of hands. If you click that, I just pretty much get a notification that you did that. I don't really know where to go from there. I've never used that feature, but maybe one day. Cool. So a couple main sections that we're going to go through here. What are the basics of sketch libraries? How do we add our libraries and get started with them? What kind of things do we need to do in terms of cleanup? Are we creating new libraries? Are we importing them? Or are we reorganizing symbols and things like that? How do we effectively link libraries, which is unique to abstract? It's really our way of distributing systems or reusable components or visual language across projects. And then what are some of the ways that people are structuring libraries? For most of this, I'm going to be using our internal system as a point of reference. I was just out in New York not too long ago, meeting with some folks at Spotify regarding their design system and things, and they had just come out to like a Google kind of design systems conference out here in the Bay Area, and their big takeaway was that no two people are really doing it exactly the same. So if you are feeling some sort of uncertainty or ambiguity about like how you're structuring a system, how you're using libraries, how you're building up reusable language and visual language for a design team, don't worry. We're all in the same boat together. I'm not going to go super heavy into the sketch side of things in terms of like how we're setting up overrides and things like that. I really don't want to misspeak on Sketch's application. So what I'm really going to focus on are some things that you can do in Sketch, how you structure at least files and that higher level of distribution, and then how we're actually distributing, maintaining through version control, and providing a democratic process of feedback to in abstract. So without any further ado, first question, Jeff asks, what type of coffee works best when abstracting for a client test Q&A? Cool. So we just switched our coffee at the office, and I was actually just talking about this a second ago, but I'm not a crazy fan of what we got going. So we got to get back on the local scene for, I don't know, my roommate works at Sightglass here in San Francisco, so I'm going to have to say Sightglass coffee to that. All right, enough of coffee talk. Let's go into some of the basics around libraries. I'm actually going to go into how to get to day mode. So I'm going to take the approach that there's going to be some people on this call out of the 60 or so participants that are on this that are either just getting started with libraries or maybe haven't played around with them at all. In that situation, really what we're after is building reusable components, reusable language. If I make something and Alex on the call asks or makes something as well. How can I borrow and not start from scratch over and over and over? There's a couple tools that provide options for this that are drawing tools, sketches. Form of this and form of your reusable components is to set up symbols. When libraries came into the picture, it meant that we could share symbols across multiple documents pretty much. So a sketch library file pretty much means that the symbols, text styles, layer styles can be shared across other documents and by proxy of abstract across multiple projects. So in abstract, we are not going to see this in the product today because we're actually making some changes to how we do a bit of our iconography. I'm a couple builds ahead. We'll be on the call. Live with an abstract will be denoted with a pink sketch diamond. Cool. So why do people use libraries? A couple different ways. We can maintain consistency across the team, what we're all building from. If Sammy and Sarah, who are on the call, are building something, whether it's a screen or a mock or a grid or something that I'm going to need to be able to use to iterate on the product that we're driving forward, we want to make sure that we're consistent in the tools that we're using. I think oftentimes one of the cadences for kind of approaching some sort of reusable visual language or reusable component structure is that we're starting to see the gaps in the product and kind of the edges from one designer to another, or even the edges from like what we have standardized and what we don't. We're starting to see a little bit of discrepancy. So when we start to see those fringes appear in what the output is of the team, or what the end result is even of the product and what's out there in production, we really want to start kind of looking into how are we going to drive consistency on this team, and how are we going to set up a foundation for our team to reuse certain aspects of our visual language. So another reason people start looking into it, and I think maybe my headphones just turned off. Hold on a second. All right, I think my headphones are working. If somebody could let me know real quick. It seems like they just died. All right, sorry about that. It gave me like a booting down kind of a sound. Cool. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me through that. So where was I? If we're already using Sketch and we're already using Abstract, there's a really natural progression towards being able to build out and effectively distribute libraries. If we're trying to build out visual language and some sort of a system and distribute those files through some sort of means that don't include effective version control, or the three things that I kind of prioritize when we're looking at building out any sort of design system or system of reusable components. One of those is version control. What's our safety net, and how do we build a system of record for the changes that are affected of this to the system? The second is an effective way to distribute and push updates. And the third would be like a democratic way to contribute back to that system for the designers and the end users that are going to be effectively having their hands on it. Abstract provides, I think, a really nice, well-rounded solutions to those three main areas, which is also, one of the reasons that if you're using Sketch and you're using Abstract, that those two things in conjunction kind of lead you towards, I guess, thinking about how we're going to be able to track and effectively build a product as a collective. With Abstract, there's a lot less ownership of individual files, and that collective mentality, I think, lends itself really well towards leading people into thinking about design systems or thinking about affecting change of product as a collective, and by in turn, how do we, reuse those components, provide that collective to affect change with consistency. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too much of a mouthful. Let's get into a little bit about what this actually looks like in the product. Before we do, I'm going to take just a brief pause for questions in between these sections. I saw that there's one in the Q&A. Sammy asks, we've noticed some slowness issues when linking multiple large linked symbol libraries, especially when linking from another project. Is that something you notice and are trying to speed up with an abstract? Or should they try and keep libraries in the same project as the working files? Do you have some other suggestions? So it's a really good question, Sammy. I'm going to leave it up in the Q&A section. This is going to be something that really comes into the last section here. How do we structure our libraries? Any file size recommendations? Where do they live? Do they live in the same project as our working files, or an independent kind of design system project? So I'll get into that in a second and leave that question up in the Q&A. Thanks very much. All right, so let's get into some of the basics about if we have any form of libraries, or we're starting without, starting with a blank template. We need to bring some things over, create some libraries. How do we go ahead and accomplish that with an abstract? To import a library, either on your branch or on master, all we need to do is go add file, import sketch file as library. When we do so, what's happening is we're bringing that file, or essentially uploading that file to abstract servers, which means that you are now having wherever that file exists locally. If it's on your desktop, it's on your desktop. If it's in a shared folder, it's in a shared folder. But effectively, it remains there, and now there's an alternate version of it within abstract that you're going to use moving forward. When we do that, we want to make sure that any files that are pulling from that library are effectively within abstract and referencing the library within abstract. So we'd introduce a couple things to manage those connections, which we'll get to after we get through the main bits of adding files to abstract. So if we have an existing library, all we need to do, add file, import sketch file as library. Same thing for creating a library. We can create files from directly within abstract instead of creating them locally and then uploading or importing them. All you need to do, add file, create sketch file as library. Really easy. And then for anything existing, like let's say that we're already working on a file, we don't have like a design system, and we don't, but there are things that we want to reuse. We want to take advantage of symbols at least, and be able to effectively distribute those across our own files or across the files that other people are using. Within abstract, what I would do is right click on any of these files, use this library. It's going to allow the symbols, layer styles, and text styles from that sketch file to be used throughout the project. It also allows us to link that library to other projects as well, link that file to other projects so that the symbols and reusable components within it can be effectively used by other people. So really easy to do that, take care of the conversion and everything for you. So all you need to do, right click, use this library. This is, I think, just important if we don't have a design system. Not everybody has a dedicated systems team, and oftentimes when you're getting started, it takes one person being super passionate about it and really pushing for it and taking on a lot of the brunt of that upfront work on their own. So another great alternative is converting files to libraries and allowing folks to reuse the symbols, layer styles, and text styles within them. All right. So I alluded to this a second ago when we're importing existing libraries or importing existing files. And this is really something that happens more so when we just want to get started. But let's say that I have a file that I'm adding to abstract. I'm importing it from my desktop or a shared folder or wherever, and it's pulling from these libraries. It's referencing a local copy. What I want to do, and I'll just jump over into our marketing project here. So let's say that I'm importing a sketch file. Let's actually get into the Mac app. See what these are pulling from. All right, cool. So I've just imported this organization file. It's pulling from some local libraries, and I want to make sure that it's pulling from the correct system within abstract. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this file, either through this area or by right-clicking the file, and just go manage libraries. And any of these libraries within abstract, again, I mentioned this icon is going to be different because I'm way ahead and I get to test all the broken stuff and break everything even more so that nobody else has to, is I'm going to make sure that these things are lining up, right? I want to make sure that my file is referencing the appropriate library that it has access to within abstract. We're going to auto-suggest a couple different things, but pretty much we're going to be able to redirect automatically that your file is pointing to the correct library. Cool. This is a relatively new feature, so it's mostly for people onboarding and getting started. If we have existing library systems we're pulling from, and we're kind of migrating to abstract initially, I just want to make sure that I'm not referencing local copies, because I'm not going to be receiving updates from local copies. I want to make sure that I'm referencing the appropriate cursors library within abstract, the appropriate personas or swatches library within abstract. So yeah, I think that takes a lot of the weight off of third-party applications like Symbol Swapper or Library Symbol Replacer or any of those plugins that people had previously leaned on quite a bit for making that transition to abstract. So just one way that we're kind of, bringing that functionality into the product. And I think that's probably like a good point. I'll just go back to the previous slide in case people have questions, but good point to kind of pause for some questions. So Chelsea asks, how do I get to the screen? I think we should be good there now. What happens in managed libraries when there isn't a one-to-one mapping from the library file outside abstract and inside abstract? Legacy symbols remain in the file. It's a really good question, Chelsea. So let's say that we have a navigation file that our file has been pulling from. I'm going to say file so many times in a row, and it is just going to constantly annoy me. So I'm so sorry if it starts to get old. But so let's say that there isn't a one-to-one match for navigation. We allow you to choose from the available libraries, and we're going to redirect the library and the symbols that we can. If that's the situation, you may still need to do a little bit of cleanup with Symbol Swapper, or I would say Symbol Swapper or something like that, where any sort of like legacy symbols that aren't included just need to be redirected to the appropriate one. Luckily, that plugin works with a high degree of reliability, as well as effectively does a lot of the bulk actions that we need to be taken. So if there isn't like a direct one-to-one mapping, I would still recommend using something like Symbol Swapper for that situation. But if there is a one-to-one and we're just getting started within abstract and we're just starting to move these things over, we're going to take care of most of that redirection for you. Well, good question, Chelsea. So Andrew asks, will these available libraries include libraries that have only styles without symbols? Yeah, so anything in abstract that is accessible to this project. So let's say I'm in our Mac application. I have a project here. I have some libraries. Some of these are linked. Some of these are part of the project. For anybody that is confused, these filled in icons are libraries. We might change this, I'm not sure. But if I need access to something else, I can link it from another project. We'll get into that a little bit more. But anything that this organization file has access to, which is the libraries that are within the project, the libraries that are linked to the project, is what we're going to be able to present as an option through the Manage Libraries feature. So even if it's just symbols, or there's just styles in there, or there's just whatever it is, text styles, layer styles, symbols, it's going to be presented as an option for you to redirect to that library. So cool. I hope that answers that question, Andrew. Anonymous attendee, mystery guest asks, is it possible to have branches linked to the most current master libraries rather than the branch library file copies? Give me 1 second to navigate back over to the presentation and think about the question. I'm a little bit confused by the phrasing of it, but just want to make sure that people have some valuable information to look at while I give it a second read. Okay. It's possible to have branches linked to the most current master libraries rather than in branch library file copies. Yeah, so branches are always going to be linked to, if we're linking a library to a project, we're always linking the most up-to-date version of that library. We don't link to libraries that are on branches. We link to what's up to date for people to pull from. If it is a per project library that's located in the master files list, that is also going to be up to date. If there's a button at the top right that says update for master instead of merge to master, there might be some updates to that library that you can go ahead and pull in, since it is a per project library. But everything that's linked is going to be up to date with what exists on master in the source repo? Really good question. Also, okay, I'll take 2 more questions before we go on to the next section. Bruno and Mirandres. So Bruno asks, having an issue where I'd like a library, I've imported to abstract, but when I go to manage libraries, they not show libraries in use. Why is that? First thing I would double check is that it's being used as a library. So making sure that in an abstract or on the file, when we say uses library, or if we've already imported it as a library and has a pink icon, and it's still not showing up in the manage library section. It's a good question. Probably have to loop in support or something. It's kind of tough to say why the connection isn't working, but it should show the libraries that are in use for that file. I mean, you could connect, what may be happening, Bruno, is that the libraries are connected to the file, but aren't currently pulling in symbols or components or textiles or layer styles from it. In that case, we might not display it as something in the manage section, but we'd have to do a little bit more digging and follow up into that one. And happy to do so. All right, Randry asks, how do you handle multiplicated symbols, cleaning it up and maintaining the crafts hotspots link? Ooh, good question. For anything regarding craft or prototyping or tools interacting with these situations beyond sketch and abstract, it's something that I'm not as well versed in. But in terms of actual simple cleanup or redirecting, make sure everything's pulling from, what is nice about abstract is that we're going to tell you exactly what symbols are being pulled into the file, as well as from what library they're pulling in from. So, for example, in this organization file, the library I'm pulling from, the navigation library, contains this set of symbols and states. These are what's actively being used. This helps me just kind of track down what there is and whether or not there might be duplicates pulling from that library. So these might be 2 separate sections. What I would then do is probably dig in with Symbol Swapper into that original library, make sure that Symbol Instance Locator is also a good one for doing a little bit of digging. So Symbol Instance Locator, Symbol Swapper, dig into where that duplicate actually exists, and then use Symbol Swapper to relocate the reference. As far as maintaining craft hotspot links, I'm not sure really what breaks a craft hotspot link or what, I guess, the background actions taken to really snap something like that on InVision side or craft side would be. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that too much for Angie. All right, cool. I'll take Alex's question last before I move on, and then we can circle back at the end for questions as well for this section. So Alex's biggest issue is that he has a branch and then tries to change a symbol. It only opens untracked, so I can't do my change anyhow. So my question is, how do I change changes within the linked library? Yeah, we'll touch on this later. It's a little bit of a workflow hiccup for us right now. So for example, we only affect change to libraries within their repository. That's kind of a foundational aspect of how these repositories work and how the connections work. So if there is something that is changing with a high degree of consistency, it might make sense to have it live at the project level. However, if it is an established and mature design system that we're building up, and there's a set of files that we want to maintain a degree of consistency with, we don't want people making one-offs and kind of taking them and then manipulating them. Then that degree of separation is really nice for that systems team. But for anything that's changing with a high degree of consistency, in terms of how often it's changing, what might be an option is to have that live at the per project library level. So directly alongside the working files, because I can edit all of these files on the same branch, open at the same time. That'll speed things up quite a bit. So possibly something to look into in terms of workflow, and then we'll also touch on this a little bit later in terms of how we structure libraries. All right, so I'll answer those live, and then also I'm just going to make a note really quick to send out a link in the email to symbol swapper, and I think it's symbol instance locator. As a reply to Alex's last question before I jump back in. All right, cool. So what project am I in here? Let's go over to collections. I'm trying not to spoil too many upcoming features as I navigate through this here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about linked libraries here. So I mentioned this earlier, but linked libraries are effectively how we distribute libraries throughout Abstract, distribute any sort of design system or reusable language, or connect libraries to other projects, allowing people to effectively pull in and receive updates from those libraries. So the way that we do this is really simple in terms of how it's set up. It's a little bit more complicated at the back end, which creates barriers where we don't edit a linked library from the project that's pulling it in. We edit it from the source. Just something conceptual, but when we actually link a library, all I need to do is go to my files, either on master or on my working branch, add file, link library, and it's going to pretty much show me all of the library files and the projects they're located in. This is something that kind of leads people to setting up these design system projects as an independent project, because it creates a central location for the entire team to pull from, knowing that the libraries at the design system level are up to date. There's no confusion around where do I find the latest version of the design system, where do I find the latest version of the reusable language that we're pulling in as a team. But oftentimes these symbols or components, they're very foundational. They're nothing too complex. They're typically not like larger built out screens or something like that. We're talking about icons or styles or buttons or states or form elements, cursors, whatever that is. Sorry, we have some stuff going on in the chat. So if there are questions, please drop them into the Q&A section really quick. That's the best place for me to go ahead and answer them through. Appreciate that, Stephanie. So I'll get to that in just a moment. All right. Cool. So we're actually linking libraries and distributing them across projects. Effectively, what we're saying is when we're setting up a design system project, here's a central location for us to pull from that visual language. These will always be up to date and represent the libraries as they exist on master. Again, I think that this provides, really checks off one of those main three boxes that I hold for how do we effectively create and maintain a design system, but a means of distribution. This is, one of the ways that we distribute libraries throughout Abstract. Also, I think that the process of, a lot of teams find the process of being able to create a branch and create a safe space to propose new components or changes or updates to the system, submit it to review requests, that really knocks out the democratic way of contributing back to the system, really building out a feedback loop for the system being created, it's being distributed, it's being contributed back to by the end user, being the designers on your team. If that's something that we're hoping to accomplish through Abstract, I think that it lends itself really well to completing that loop for a design system. So once we link a library to a project, all of our files in that project have access to that library. They have access to the symbols, the layer styles, the text styles, any of the components that we're looking to reuse. We'll be able to pull those into our working files on our branch and be able to make use of them. Any updates happen to those libraries, we'll be able to pull them in at our own discretion. Let's say that I'm pulling in a library that Stephanie has provided in another project. Whenever Stephanie makes a change or an update to that library by creating a branch and merging a branch to master, I'll be able to pull in any updates to that library at that time. If we're not just going to push updates to the library into your file, we're never going to mess with your file without you being the primary driver behind those actions. So if there are updates available, it happens the same way that it does normally in Sketch. Library updates available in the top right corner. We're able to pull in those updates as normal. If there's any conflicts or anything that needs your attention, Sketch handles that in a very similar way that we actually handle resolving merge conflicts, but presenting to you what the symbols are, what the differences are, and the ability to resolve those. So actual updates are being received effectively the same way. What's different here compared to tracking down a file within Dropbox, hoping that it's the latest version of the file or the latest version of that library, reconnecting things and being able to work from that and hoping that it doesn't break everything with no safety net through version control, or pushing an update to a library that breaks everything for the team and no way to roll that back. Effectively what we're able to do, link a library to our project. We're always going to be pulling in the latest. We're going to receive updates as normal. It's a much cleaner flow, and in terms of actually managing and distributing and contributing back to that system is much preferable for a lot of teams. So library updates happen as normal within Sketch, making it easy to use libraries as normal and continue them, pulling them into your work as normal. All right, so I'm going to take a quick pause for questions because it looks like we've got a couple. Stephanie asks, can you link a library that is in abstract to a file that is currently outside abstract? So you can't do that with anything from abstract. What's in abstract talks to what's in abstract right now. Any files that are like local, or they're on a desktop, or they're in a shared folder nest somewhere named Alden iOS v3 file.sketch, that library is not going to be able to connect to what's in abstract. I can set it up actually, but it's not going to receive updates. So pretty much the connection there is broken. It's like a one-time deal. So that, unfortunately, we need files to be within abstract to be able to maintain those connections, push updates, as well as effectively distribute that language. So really good question, Stephanie. Something I should probably mention at the beginning of these sessions as well, but it kind of goes for library files, but also regular files that are pulling from libraries within abstract. Cool. Would you recommend agencies set up this is a question coming from Frank. Would you recommend for agencies to set up a global library that holds libraries for all client projects? So in this situation, the agencies that I've worked with in the past have been more comfortable setting up kind of per client projects in that situation. So since there's not going to be like, if we are doing things where, let's say we're working with a client, and for client A, the system that we're effectively building up with them is going to be different from the system that we're building up with client B, or the components that we're using. They're really independent systems. It would be more appropriate, and I found that folks at agencies have been more comfortable with having those live as separate per client-based projects. But if there is a lot of commonality on some of the foundation levels, like what are the icons, the form elements, the color swatches, overrides, things that color swatches that we're going to be using as overrides for iconography, etc., things like that. I think there might be an opportunity to set up a central location for a project, but depending on the nature of the agency and what you're building and what you're really reusing, there might be an opportunity, but would be more than happy to have a closer look and chat more about that, Frank. Yeah, solid question, thanks. Okay, Abhinav asks, is it possible to add version number to linked libraries to be able to reference it better across a project? There's also a similar question from an anonymous attendee above that. How do you handle a project which is using an older version of a symbol from a separate design system repository? A little bit different. I'm going to take Abhinav's questions first, but let's say that we are distributing updates. So in the past, when we are having a little bit more difficult time to manage libraries, and there's a lot more confusion around what's the latest, and we're distributing things in kind of like packeted bulk releases for systems. Effectively, the system is in abstract. A lot of teams maintain it as a continuously evolving thing, continuously evolving organism that grows and shifts as the team operates. If we want to kind of dam that up at certain intersections, based on kind of older habits that have evolved from, I guess, difficulty in distribution or managing files, we can go ahead and do so. In that situation, what I would recommend is if we are working on a design system and we have a single file or something like that, we're creating a branch to affect change, we're saying like, oh, we're going to do V12 because that's the naming convention we have in place for our pushed releases of the system. Then what we could do is rename the file, push it to master, and then for where people have it linked, it should appear as, badges V12 or something like that. But I think that the whole need for that really stems out of difficulty in managing files. So if we treat this as kind of an organic set of files that are growing as the team deems necessary with updates to, see what we got here, overlays or icon names or panel backgrounds or arrow icons or whatever it is. These really aren't being done in releases. They're being done as contributions to the system that everybody's pulling from, because what exists on master is always the latest. We're not going to be pulling from older versions of the library. We're always going to be up to date. We can, I think, there could be an opportunity to kind of stage out what exists on master. So let's say that we have some ongoing work at the branch level. If I wanted to say that same thing, like, oh, these are the new things we're going to contribute to the system for V12. Sure. And member type indicator, commit icons, renaming artboards, whatever, these are all part of that. I would create this parent branch, create a couple child branches off of that, and then merge those in to my v.12 branch, rename the file, system v.12, go ahead and merge that to master. So hopefully that answers the question, Abhinav. This session is also recorded if you need to refer to it, or feel free to ping us a little bit more about it. But that's how I would accomplish that through abstract. All right. So I'm going to answer anonymous attendee's question and then another one from Chelsea as well. Actually, let's just go with Chelsea's first because it's a really quick and easy one. It would be helpful to create folders within projects. This is a future initiative. Yeah, so one thing that we're working on is actually the ability to group projects together. As opposed to file folders within project, we'll probably never have anything in abstract called a folder, but we will be able to group projects into sections, which I think creates a nice level of hierarchy. Right now, projects are flat, and I think the ability to manage specific projects or projects with more specific intents as opposed to broad ones, that opens up a lot of possibilities there. So maybe a way to group files within projects or something, but there's a lot of things up in the air around what file types will eventually incorporate within abstract. So a couple of questions that we have to solve for and answer for first before we tackle how we're going to be managing these files. The next level of hierarchy that we're going to be adding in forms of grouping will be to the project level. So I hope that kind of sheds some light on things, Chelsea. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for the question. Okay. Anonymous attendee asks, how do you handle a project which is using an older version of a symbol from a separate design system repository? If that design system repository, the old one, is something that's within abstract, we can still relink those symbols and receive updates from them. But if it is from a separate repo that we're kind of killing off or degrading, or it just simply isn't around anymore, what our team would typically do is query the existing system for something that might be able to solve for it in its place. But if it doesn't exist and we say, all right, so we're killing off this older system, or it's a separate repo or whatever, and we're not going to be pulling from that anymore, there's no way for us to kind of relink and reconnect and receive updates from that. Is there anything within our existing visual language that we can pull from? If there is, it might make sense to contribute that to the system as an independent icon or form element or whatever it is, and then relink things that way and replace it. But that kind of work, typically for most teams, I see happening on a case-by-case basis, like as people are pulling from the system and they're like, oh shit, this is an old thing. We should probably replace that. It's not typically done as like, all right, we're doing like one massive audit and we're going through everything, because it just really creates a blocker for the workflow of a lot of people if you don't have dedicated resources to manage those systems. But that's what I would recommend mystery guest anonymous attendee. Hopefully that answers the question, and if it doesn't, feel free to drop a follow-up question in there. All right, so let me go back over to our project here. Last section is pretty quick, so I'm going to jump in and wrap this up with a couple minutes left for questions before I get to Chelsea and Elia's questions as well. So last bit of this is how do we organize libraries with an abstract? There's a couple different structures that have developed relatively organically. When we started out, we had a single monolithic library file. This was great because it meant that when we were distributing things pre-abstract, when we were still an incubator called Habitat, we could say, here's V12 of the library. Like, here it is, it's done. Toss it in a shared folder, allow people to reconnect, receive updates from it, etc. What's happening with that is that those libraries were huge. They were difficult to navigate. They were a little bit, probably just as tough to organize. And the structure that we kind of moved towards when we were doing less and less of these pushed releases for teams of, here's the version, here's like, if the lifespan of a design system or a library is represented linearly, here's a DAM, it's V12, here's a DAM, it's V13, here's a DAM, it's V14. And if we kind of treat and represent master as what's the latest, and we are always connected to what is the latest, then really the need as a designer to distribute things in the system of damming up that the progression of the system or prevent people from pulling new components in, it starts to go away a little bit. Definitely some cases where we need to prevent people from pulling like what is the reskin of our new marketing site into their work. And in that case, stage it out at the branch level. But if we're really contributing to a system, then the point is it became much easier by using abstract to manage multiple files, meaning that we can provide more granularity in the intent of our files. So a couple of the benefits: more granular control around what we're actually attaching to different projects. The file sizes are also super small, meaning that they perform quickly. And this goes back to one of the first questions that we had here. I think, right? Sammy was experiencing some slowness with libraries. Effectively, if we're trying to link like a 500 megabyte library across projects, like anything I'd say over like 120 megabytes within as a sketch file is pretty big, and might want to look at slimming it down or effectively breaking it up into more granular sections. I think that's typically where Sketch recommends keep things under. That's also kind of what I recommend to different teams is we start tipping that 100, 120 megabytes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot packed into a sketch file. They're very good at keeping file sizes small. So when we're actually evaluating the real size there, it can be a lot. I'd say a 100 megabyte sketch file probably performs like a gig Photoshop file or something like that from back in the day. But up to you. Definitely I don't recommend that anybody who is just getting started with abstract or just moving libraries over kind of evaluates like, oh, we should break up our entire design system into multiple files right away. Don't do that. Only do this kind of a structure if it's something that you start feeling those needs for. Either the file's getting too big or people are confused about where to look in the library for certain things, like the structure needs to be reevaluated. if the structure of the system needs to be reevaluated, then I think there's a good opportunity to evaluate the system as a whole, where things live, what files they live in, etc. But it's also, I'd say it's like 50-50 from what I see of teams preparing libraries in a more granular way and design systems in a granular way through abstract, or having a single large file for people to just say like, that's the one, that's everything, I'm gonna pull it in. I also definitely see a lot of teams that have challenges around getting designers to actually use the library. From talking with people on the ops side or systems teams, there's always going to be that, but hopefully through something like abstract, we at least make that barrier to entry extremely low. Being able to just link it to your project and have access and not have to worry about whether or not you're pulling outdated symbols into your file. So I think this is probably a good point for some questions. And then I'll actually walk through our actual system here if I can get through these questions really quick. So Chelsea asks, why would you use a child branch? It would be great to understand why a child branch would be created. Let's say, Chelsea, that we are working on something and a couple of people are going to be working on it. Let's actually go, instead of a systems example, let's go for example of a feature. But so Jordan is working on a forced app update flow because we need people on the latest version, because if people don't ever update their machines and they're using abstract from a year and a half ago, like we should probably do something about getting people up to speed so they don't run into bugs and errors. Dana is going to be contributing some illustrations. This nature of a parent and child branch really allows Dana to pull in updates from Jordan's branch without Jordan having to merge to master first. So it creates a nested branch structure where we can bite off, in this situation, Jordan biting off a couple different specific tasks for a larger goal, or sometimes done in collaboration with others. It's pretty much whenever another branch needs to pull in work without merging to master. Cool, so also in a situation where we're staging things out by release, this assets branch could be V12, and then underneath that, feature A, feature B, feature C, feature D, whatever. We could stage out releases and updates to master based on what that parent branch is, still work off of it, and receive updates on those child branches, just on those child branches, and then roll everything back up and merge. But branch structure like that, not typically the topic of this webinar, but hopefully that sheds some light onto the use cases there. It's a very flexible structure. There's a lot of things to take advantage of, and hopefully that sheds some light on it. All right, Elliot asks, how do you do design and documentation abstract? Are there plans to having documentation capabilities with an abstract? Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that we've been a little bit more conscious of lately. Any sort of higher level guidelines we typically document outside of abstract right now and link to from various places with an abstract. Whether that's the project about section that provides a little bit of cadence on where our issues are located, or where document briefs are, or why we create collections and option stakeholders. What most teams also prepare is something like this. This actually lives in paper, but I have that exported as a PDF. How do we use abstract? What are our branch conventions? What are our symbol conventions? When do we commit? Who should you add as a reviewer, etc. This is something I'm trying to get into like a blank template to share out with folks. But yeah, that sort of internal documentation can really only be built through like a conversation with the team. So it's a little bit difficult to provide. There's gonna be a little bit of wrangling, but that would be something we would love to have within abstract, as well as be able to at least attach. Right now, we do it through a series of linking the project about section or branch summary. Solid question. Rachel asks, how would you recommend structuring libraries for components across multiple platforms? iOS, Android, web. Really common question for anything that is going to be a commonality between those platforms. That's really actually how our design system exists. We have iconography that is going to be used across web, mobile, and native Mac. for us right now, but these things are global to those platforms. For anything specific, and this was really that next slide of the webinar, for anything specific to the platform, we actually have living at the project level, because it doesn't make sense to distribute this globally. If we have platform-based projects, platform-based libraries should really live with those platform-based projects, or at least be accessible through that design system project and then linked. But if it's something that we're going to need to edit as we go, we really want to have that alongside kind of our working files. Cool, hopefully that helps. I know we're running a little bit tight on time here. And we have a couple more questions to get through, but just to clarify and expand on that last question a little bit more, what most teams will do is set up this design system project with global components and libraries, whether it's a single file or multiple files, link those to platform or feature-specific projects for anything that is specific to the intent or scope of that project. Have that live alongside your working files. For example, these components that are native to our Mac application or navigation native to our Mac application that aren't used in a web app or whatever, live within our Mac application project, our Mac app project. So anything that is global and foundational, lives in the design system project, is pulled in. A little bit simpler than some atomic concepts, but really we have 3 levels. We have the design system, per project libraries, and then working files. I think that's a really common structure for people using abstract. And if you have any other structures or things that work for you, feel free to share them with us. Always looking for some different use cases as well. All right. Frank asks, will we be sharing these presentation slides? That'd be really valuable. I might be able to attach them as like a download link to Vimeo. That's really where this will be up for later reference to share with your team, vimeo.com/goabstract. And I'll see if I can do something about grabbing these slides and adding them as a download link to that, or at least send them out an email. Thanks, Frank. And if I forget, remind me. All right. Andrew Nickel asks, is there a capability to, I think we've successfully moved into the Q&A section here after covering that last bit. So I'm going to pull up some contact information. And again, that last bit that I just walked through, per project, linked libraries, just a little bit of extra information as I go through these questions here. All right. Is there a capability to duplicate an entire repo or project, such as the design system, in order to build a new design system while keeping the links between libraries? Exporting and importing the files, keep these relative links. So in the situation where we're taking our design system and we want to use that to start something off of it completely, I would first ask yourself if it can be accomplished by staging out branches. If not, then exporting the project, which can be done really easily. So what I would do is clean up the project, merge the branches in, and then go to your project, export the files, and set up a new kind of private project. Make sure that nobody pulls from it, say like design, system, etc. And it's going to have those files, and we'll be able to effectively, when everybody switches over, either replace the existing design system files in here or have people move to that project. Probably better just to replace the files within abstract, which can be done by going to this file here, form elements, and saying replace. So that would be the flow I would recommend for that situation. Andrew, as the easiest way to roll that system out, but also work on it kind of in the background way that people won't be pulling in future components and things to their team. Really good question. I know we're running tight on time, so I'm going to answer the last question from Hagen Rivers. Would you be willing to share that doc that you just showed? It'd be really helpful, even in rough form. Absolutely. Try to figure out a way to provide that as even like a white paper template or something, if that would be helpful, because oftentimes with abstract, the questions you need to ask are not immediately there until you run into the situation where you're like, all right, how do I accomplish this? I'm kind of in a pickle. So even just like me and Jordan, one of our product designers, joke all the time, like people have to have kind of like the talk about how they're using abstract. And I think that document is a nice cadence to it. So I'm happy to share. If anybody wants it, hit me up on Twitter and I can just send it to you. It's probably the quickest thing. So, all right, I think that's the last of it. Liz asks if we can share the webinar recording. Yep, it's going to go out in an email and then be on our Vimeo as well. Last thing to touch on, Bruno was having issues where the libraries are not showing up in the manage section. Definitely what I would recommend doing is dropping a line to support here. So it should support at goabstract.com, and I'll pull up our contact information. This build I'm on is not the best. All right, so I'll pull up our contact information here for any sort of support issues, possibly like Bruno's or something like that. Support at goabstract.com, Twitter at goabstract, and then there's a whole community over on Spectrum of like 4,000 something folks. I'm gonna have a sip of my coffee real quick while you guys break out your pen and paper if you need it. Cool. So spectrum.chat/abstract. That's a really good place for resources. It's not just us posting on there. It's thousands of users servicing different use cases, which I think is super valuable. So thanks everybody for joining. I have been talking for a while now, so I'm going to go ahead and take a break here for a little bit and go outside the office and take a walk. But really appreciate everybody's attention today. And if you have any questions or things that you want to see in webinars or things that you want to get out of these, let me know. Also, check out our open roles. We're hiring a bunch. We're growing super fast. When I started last year, there was less than 20 of us, and now there's 70 something of us. And it's crazy, and 2019 is going to be insane, but yeah, wouldn't be here without all you folks. So feel free to hit us up if you have any questions, and hopefully see you all soon. Thanks.